On today's show, Karl-Anthony Towns made his Knicks preseason debut, but are there questions about his toughness already? And has Jason Tatum fixed his jumper? We debate that and more on today's Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA. Wes Goldberg here with Swipa. However you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Trying something new today here, a little midday show for you. We're going to go around the Locked On NBA network to cover some of the biggest topics from our first preseason weekend. Got a bunch of stuff to get to here. The Suns have a new look offense under Mike Budenholzer. Bronny and LeBron played together for the first time over the weekend, and Jason Tatum has worked on fixing his jumper. But before we get to all of that, let's start with Karl-Anthony Towns, who made his preseason debut for the Knicks over the weekend. He finished with 10 points and 4 rebounds in 15 minutes. For more on his debut, here's Alex Wolf and Gavin Shaw from Locked On Knicks.
Hopefully the hustle factor is always there, I guess that's one of the biggest criticisms that I've seen from like Timberwolves fans about Cat is like they just kind of complain like, oh, thank God he was soft, whatever, like glad to see him off the team, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if I necessarily believe all that. Like a guy that's gotten into literal fights on an NBA floor and everything else, I don't know. He doesn't seem like the type that goes for fouls in the way that like Joel Embiid does or anything like that, where it seems like it looked like he's trying to sell contact all the time and isn't willing to just like bang with dudes or whatever and get down low and throw a shoulder into somebody. That doesn't really strike me as his type of game, but he's probably the number one guy that I think has to prove something in that department. Cause I think OG proved that last year, both with how he played and then like the grit to come out in game 7 like that. I think Bridges, has a rep as like a defensive stopper and everything else. And it has that like Villanova team DNA, which has worked really well for the Knicks so far. So I think as far as that like dog factor, it kind of just comes down to like Cat.
Swiper, got to admit, not an angle I thought about, the whole toughness quotient, and do they have more or less? But what do you think about the Knicks maybe losing some toughness with their offseason moves, and does that even matter?
No, I don't really think that it's going to be a real talking point. We just saw the Indiana Pacers make the Eastern Conference Finals, and I don't think people would describe them as like tough, but they're just very good. They're just very skilled. I think the Knicks are just very good, very skilled. They don't have to be tough. I think toughness is intrinsic in like, can you secure rebounds? Like, are you going to play physical on the perimeter? Well, they're going to have OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, and Josh Hart. So yeah, I think they're going to be able to bang a little bit. And then when Mitchell Robinson gets back and Karl-Anthony Towns, and I don't know about you, I wouldn't describe Jalen Brunson as a non-tough player. So I think their toughness is going to be there. And then, who do they have to face that's going to be a tough team? I mean, you don't think the Celtics, I think of skill, like just overwhelming talent and size, but toughness, like I think you can get inside on them depending on who you are. I think that the 76ers, they ostensibly should be tough, but Embiid, given his injury history, who knows? Now, the Miami Heat, obviously, as you know, they're a very tough team, but they lack some of the skill that you'll need in some ways. So I think the Heat are actually, or the Knicks are going to have a lot of things that they're going to take advantage of. And look, I already did like a little like basketball breakdown on how the Knicks are going to be able to utilize Karl-Anthony Towns running a flex offense and Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, and Karl-Anthony Towns running like a semi-triangle on the left-hand side with Karl posting up. Look, they're going to be dynamic. Karl-Anthony Towns basically as a three-point shooter averaged about 1.25 points per possession as a three-point shooter last year. And so you imagine that with a better post scorer than Julius Randle, and you give him a bunch of shooters and wings around him, I think they're going to be dynamic. And really, Wes, given their health, if they're healthy, they're going to be able to continue to be the best team in the East. I don't think they will be after the Celtics, but man, like I think Karl's going to add so much to their offense. And if they can just be big and rally defensively, they're going to be overwhelming for a lot of teams.
There's no doubt about that. And to your point about the toughness, I hear your point on the Indiana Pacers. I'll raise you one Boston Celtics, right? I think there's a difference when we talk about physical toughness and mental toughness. And I think the biggest thing against the Celtics for years was they weren't mentally tough enough. They got over that hump in terms of mental toughness last year. I don't think anybody would consider them a physically imposing team necessarily. Of course, they have some size and they have some Jaylen Brown, Kristaps Porzingis, and guys like that. But they're not like that physically bruising team the way that even like the Timberwolves last year were. There's a difference. And I don't know that the Knicks are suffering any mental toughness here. They've still got Tom Thibodeau, like you said, still have Jalen Brunson, a lot of guys who have done a lot of things in the NBA. I have other concerns about the Knicks. Health, for instance. Maybe that's a different form of toughness, but that's always going to be an issue with this team. But right now, I don't really care about the loss in toughness. I also think that the conversation around the Knicks has gotten a little out of whack in terms of, oh no, like they're losing some of their identity and the power of friendship and the Villanova guys and all these things. We act like this team won anything. This team has never made it past the second round of the playoffs. We're acting like this identity was something near and dear, something to hold on to, where if anything, they needed to maybe switch up that identity to get over the hump a little bit in the Eastern Conference. And obviously they have made talent upgrades. That's not to say that their roster is without any holes or any concerns. I think there's depth concerns now with some of the moves that they made. Mitchell Robinson being injured isn't helping things. They were going to have a lot of things to figure out. And one of my big takeaways from this first preseason game, Swipa, was, yeah, it's clunky. And it's going to look clunky. You make some great points about the kind of offense that they can run. They're not going to be running that day one. It's not going to happen. They got to work their way into it. And that's fine. That's what we expect when you start of assembling a lot of new talent, not just Karl-Anthony Towns, but OG Anunoby has barely played with this group. They obviously added Mikal Bridges earlier in the offseason. There's going to be a point where they need to get to build some chemistry. But in terms of losing that physical toughness, I don't really care about that because Karl-Anthony Towns is the kind of player who can flip a matchup. You know, you're going to be able to, you don't have to pound Joel Embiid or Giannis or Brook Lopez or any of these guys in the post because the idea is to pull them away from the basket when Karl-Anthony Towns is out there. So I'm not as concerned about the lack of toughness as much as some people might be here. Did you have any other takeaways from Karl-Anthony Towns' debut, though?
Yeah, I just think he just is a new dynamic. You know, Julius Randle had this propensity to be a pull-up shooter in transition. Well, Karl-Anthony Towns is an actual pull-up shooter. And the fact that he's 7 feet tall and can do that, even just yesterday, he shot a three from, it felt like 28 feet yesterday on the left wing and just swished it. And so just think about like the different like variables that are going to come with him offensively. And like now they have a center that literally is stretching the floor all the way to dang near half court. So you just think about Jalen Brunson going downhill. And I think some of this is other teams defensively, they're going to be like, we're so compromised in the Eastern Conference versus this team. We're just going to have to put our big on like OG and just hope OG's not making shots. Okay, well, then now you can run action off of OG, dribble handoff, get them back and drop, get them back in position, get their big back up, put Karl-Anthony Towns on the post, have another floor spacer out there. Wes, like, if Tom Thibodeau is able to utilize their roster correctly, legitimately, they could be one of the best offenses in the league. But like I said earlier, and like you said, it's going to come down to their health. If they're healthy, Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart with Karl-Anthony Towns, man, that's going to be a light show.
Tibbs has this reputation of being sort of old school and all these things. You know how many three-pointers they took in that preseason game, Swipa?
How many?
45.
Yeah.
Obviously, that would have been tops in the league. The Celtics led the league last year at 43-point attempts per game. They took 45. Karl-Anthony Towns, 5 of his 7 field goal attempts were three-pointers. He went 1 for 5. I don't care. I'm not worried about Cat's three-point shooting. Like I said, some stuff looked clunky in their first time together. They're going to get up a lot of three-pointers. They're going to play this 5-out offense. I thought Miles McBride off the bench looked really good. He had 22 points off the bench. Maybe a reason why they decided that they could get rid of Dante DiVincenzo or lose one of these backcourt guys is, hey, McBride is ready for more minutes. I thought Campaign was actually pretty good for them off the bench, too. They've got some pieces. Landry Shamet, 16 points. Looks like he's going to get one of these 15 roster spots here. So they've got options there. But to me, the depth doesn't matter as much when the top end of the roster is just so talented now, right?
Right.
OG Anunoby, Karl-Anthony Towns, Mikal Bridges, Jalen Brunson, all those guys are at the very minimum fringe all-stars. Some of them, Brunson, an MVP candidate, Karl-Anthony Towns, an all-NBA guy multiple times. Like, I don't know that anybody outside of the Boston Celtics can match the talent that this team has in the top 6 or 7 in its depth chart. So, yeah, not concerned necessarily about the Knicks, but obviously I think it's going to at least take some time for them to all come together here. But the Suns also underwent a makeover over the summer. Did we already see some of those dividends pay off right away? We'll get to that next here on Locked On NBA. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. So it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. Maybe you're having trouble moving up at work, or you've run into a wall in a relationship. Maybe you're anxious, you're sad, and you just don't know why. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks again for making Locked On NBA your first listen of the day. The best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. The Suns underwent a makeover this summer. They hired Mike Budenholzer as head coach. They signed Tyus Jones to be their starting point guard, and we saw the difference right away in their preseason game against the Lakers. With more, here's Brendan Clean and Benjamin Garcia from Locked On Suns.
It looked better than Vogel's, and that's not very hard, and that's not to say that it was a championship-level offense, but it's the first preseason game. I have not seen so many screens and movement. People weren't just sitting in corners. It was just nice to see just a different level of basketball being played.
To me, Ben, I mean, yeah, the movement on offense was bullet point number 1 in my notes. I think it was obvious, and it wasn't just the first set that they ran. It wasn't just the first action within a set. It was, a sudden guy backpedaling out to the perimeter who was standing in one place, or, a backside screen. It just never ended. And you saw it really work. The team missed shots early in this game. The first half, I think they shot like 38%. I kind of don't care. What we saw in terms of the process of this offense was night and day.
Only about 14 minutes apiece for the big three in Phoenix: Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker. But the folks over at Locked On Suns seemed really excited about what they saw from that preseason game. What about you, Swipa? What did you think?
Yeah, I think Bud is going to be a better floor raiser over the course of a regular season. But look, I think they were good last year. I think that their offense is going to be better. I think defensively, figuring out how to utilize their personnel. Tyus Jones starting at the point guard position, if he does, and, depending on what they want to do, Bradley Beal and Booker and them, they're just going to be kind of small, they're going to have to work ways around that. But really, it's going to come down to Nurkic, come down to Plumlee, come down to Kevin Durant. Because if you watch Mike Budenholzer, he does a really great job at utilizing drop bigs, especially, and rim protection. KD has, I think, excelled as a rim protector, as a wing rim protector in particular, since really the 18-19 year. And so he's gotten more and more comfortable in that role. So he's going to have to be a really important defensive piece to make Bud's system work, given their personnel on the perimeter with Jones, with Beal, and with Booker. But offensively, I do think they are going to take a legitimate step forward. I'm excited to see kind of how they make things work over the course of the season. But again, and even more so than what we talked about earlier with the Knicks, they're going to come down to health. If Kevin Durant's healthy, they're going to be really good. If Devin Booker's healthy, they're going to be really good. If Bradley Beal is available and healthy, they're going to be really good. But it's going to be a matter, can they stay on the court together? And when they do, and if the pull-up jump shot isn't working, is Mike Budenholzer going to be able to manufacture enough attempts towards the rim or towards the rim in transition to be able to maximize the shooting and athletes they have around them? So that's something I actually want to see if they have a solvent for later on. But ultimately, the Suns at their peak, they're going to be a top 3 or 4 team in the Western Conference. How often are they able to reach that? That's going to come to scheme integration with Bud, and that's going to come to overall health.
Yeah, I think right away we already saw some of them using the screens that are off the ball and things like that, slip screens to get to the basket. We saw Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal all getting just wide open kind of run rims, which was pretty surprising considering who they are, and the fact that those are probably things you want to take away from them is sort of those easy shots. But in terms of the screen game overall, having Tyus Jones in there as a ball handler allows Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, for instance, to screen for each other off the ball, run those kinds of Golden State Warriors style split cuts or whatever it might be. And you force the defense to pay attention and make some decisions. And while they're doing that, you might have Bradley Beal on the other wing kind of spacing the floor and Tyus Jones making all the right decisions. And I thought he did a good job of that, by the way, in his first preseason game. I think we're going to see that right away. We're going to see all this stuff. Frank Vogel rolled the ball out and he said, look, they're going to figure out the offense. I got enough star power on offense. They're going to figure it out. I got to focus on getting us to a higher place defensively. Yeah. And there was just an inherent ceiling on this team that was really low defensively. And Mike Budenholzer was coming in here and saying, you know what? I know we got to get a little bit better defensively. We've got to be even better offensively. It's not enough to just roll the ball out. This team hovered around like top 10 in offensive rating last year. That's not good enough. That's not how this team is built. They have to be top 2, 3 in offensive rating to be a real contender. I mean, that's what we're talking about. This team is going to be dragged by its offense. It's not enough to be good or great. They have to be elite offensively for them to be taken seriously as contenders. And I think with Mike Budenholzer there, we're going to get there. And with Tyus Jones and Monty Morris and some of the other additions they made, I thought Plumlee gave him some good minutes in this game too. Defense, there's definitely going to be concerns. Look, I know they won this preseason game. The starters, they didn't play the second half. They gave up 69 points in the first half to the Lakers, who also looked pretty good. We'll talk about them here later on too. But 69 points in the first half for a defense that was actually trying to do something. I know it's preseason, first time, whatever. They need to be a lot better. There was times where Kevin Durant was the biggest guy on the floor. Like, yes, he does thrive as a wing help defender and stuff. He's not necessarily a rim protector as your 1-5 man, as the biggest guy on the floor, which they had to do a little bit last year under Vogel. They're going to have to do that this year too, and that's going to be fine as long as the trade-off offensively works out mathematically for them. But they've got some stuff to figure out. No Yusuf Nurkic in this game, I guess, is worth noting. But they're going to have some stuff to figure out defensively. But I do think Mike Budenholzer can get them there. But sometimes offense is your best defense, and this team, I think, is going to be like just walking that line this year.
Yeah, they should be trusting the shot variants. Grayson Allen, Tyus Jones, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Royce. I'm talking about hunting three-pointers, manufacturing three-pointers. We're going to get as best a shot as possible, and I think they need to be operating under the same guise and gumption as the Boston Celtics. You know, they don't need to. Now, Boston, in preseason game number 1, I want to say, again, starters only played the first half. I think they had 61 threes that they attempted.
Yeah.
So that might just need to be the new mark. You know, how do we create with the Suns offense 38 to 45 threes a game? And we're just getting them up as often as possible because we have so many dynamic shooters. And by that, we outplay you in the math game. And then on the other end, if we can get a good enough team defense, we can get enough requisite stops to be able to go down on the other end and convert. And I think some of this is going to be, okay, are we going to be deploying some zone? You know, what are we going to do with like ball personnel and all them? But, yo, I'm telling you right now, Bud has his hands full because trying to protect Tyus Jones and Bradley Beal especially, that's going to be a job.
Yep.
But if there's a coach that can figure it out, I think Bud might be able to do it.
Kevin Durant, 3 of his shot attempts were three-pointers. So 3 of 10 were three-pointers. Bradley Beal took 7 shot attempts overall. Only 3 of them were three-pointers. Devin Booker got the memo. He took 12 shots in the game. 50% of those were three-pointers. 6 of them came from beyond the arc. That was my question all along is, okay, it's cool that you added Mike Budenholzer here. It's cool that you added Tyus Jones. Tyus Jones making the minimum. I know that maybe he took a pay cut or whatever. That dude's making the minimum, and he's going to be the one to gather all these maximum all-NBA caliber players, these potential Hall of Famers here, and say, no, I'm going to be in charge of the offense. I don't know. I don't know if that you're going to get that buy-in. To me, that's the key word here for the Phoenix Suns all year long. It's buying in. It's cool to do it in preseason games when everything's new and fresh and you're coming off those media day fumes and everybody's feeling good. Can you keep doing it through 82 regular season games? And I think, they want to push the pace a little bit. They want to get up early threes in the shot clock and all of these things. Kevin Durant doesn't play that way.
Yeah.
He never really has, outside of maybe a couple years there in Golden State. And even then, he was sort of their hammer, where they were going to
isolation player,
exactly.
mad efficient.
And he's never really been that. And maybe he doesn't have to be, right? He's so efficient that he doesn't necessarily have to be that, but he's going to have to be more of that if the team as a whole is going to get up three-pointers, because these stars can't look at the role players like they did last year and be like, it's your job to play defense. It's your job to get up threes. I'm going to be me. You figure out how you're going to satellite around my orbit. That's not going to work. Everybody has to buy in because that's how, like you said, the math, that's how it works. You kind of need everybody on the same page, and that's what made the Celtics so threatening last year, is that everybody from the stars all the way down the role players were buying in. So getting these guys to kind of change the way they play, easier said than done. I guess we'll see when it happens. But I think if you're coming from Phoenix, you feel really good about at least what you saw in this first game. But obviously there's room to make some progress. Coming up, LeBron and Bronny played together for the first time over the weekend. But what part of it was the most surprising? Find out next here on Locked On NBA. Today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Hey, and if you want to kind of check out some of these NBA odds here, opening weekend is around the corner. The Knicks, 4.5-point underdogs to the Boston Celtics on opening night. No Kristaps Porzingis in that game for the Celtics. No Mitchell Robinson, of course, for the Knicks, but if you think that this Karl-Anthony Towns acquisition is going to move that line a little bit for you, maybe the Knicks pull off an upset on opening night. FanDuel is the place to place your bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Thanks again for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. The best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. We'll talk about how Jason Tatum addressed his jumper here in a minute, but let's go to Los Angeles, where we got our first look at LeBron James and Bronny James on the court together over the weekend. The timing, though, that might have been a little bit odd. Here are the Kaminsky brothers from Locked On Lakers talking about LeBron and Bronny playing together for the first time.
I mean, for all the conversation about Bronny and his place in the league, whatever, it is pretty cool to see the two of them play together.
It's interesting when they took the floor together to open the second quarter, and they played together about 4 minutes and then subbed out within 30 seconds of each other in the second quarter. I will admit I was a bit surprised that it happened in the preseason for the first time, just because I thought everybody involved would err on the side of, for lack of a better way of putting it, showmanship, and save this history for when the games officially count and when the history is most notable. But then it was pointed out to me on Twitter by Flyest Hamster that it was Bronny.
Is that his Christian name?
I didn't ask, not my business. The information was more important to me. This game, it was Bronny's 20th birthday. So that I don't know. I don't know if that influenced anything or not. But if it did, that makes a lot of sense, and why LeBron and Bronny and the organization would feel compelled to do this in a preseason game, because beyond the significance of those two playing together, it happens to be taking place on a literal milestone for Bronny, you know.
Bronny's happy birthday notwithstanding here, I actually thought it was genius by JJ Redick to do this now, right? I thought we were always going to see it pretty early because you kind of want to get this out of the way so that now the whole conversation isn't, well, hey, we're 5 games into the season, we're 2 weeks into the season, Bronny and LeBron haven't played together, what are you going to do? There was always going to be questions about whether or not Bronny deserved to be on the court. And I'm not even talking about on the Lakers roster, that's been talked about enough. But if he's going to get minutes over some of these other guys in the Lakers rotation, I think he has to earn them, at least in the regular season. That's not the case in the preseason. Preseason's time for experimenting, just figuring out lineups and rotations and all these things. It's a lot less of a meritocracy, and it's much more of just sort of an art project and just sort of figuring out, finger painting. That's what I thought was the genius here with JJ Redick is nobody's going to question Bronny James playing in a preseason game. In fact, you would be expecting to see him in a preseason game. So why not just do it right away? Let's see him with LeBron James. You start the second quarter. There's no substitution. There's no big thing. You're not taking anybody off the court for Bronny. You're subbing him in at the start of the second quarter with LeBron James as you're kind of making your mass substitutions there, your lineups for the second quarter, and we get to see it right away for about 4 minutes. And I thought it was cool. We could talk a little bit about what we thought about Bronny and his debut there, but in terms of doing it in the preseason, at the very least, every time JJ Redick now gets a question about when are we going to see Bronny and LeBron together in the regular season, he can at least always say, we already did it. You saw it in the preseason. That was the magical moment. And by the way, it happened on his birthday, which makes it even more special than doing it in a regular season game. Buy that or sell that, I don't care. He can at least now point to that, and it sort of diffuses the entire situation now. I thought it was a stroke of genius. What about you?
Yeah, I think that was a very shrewd move by JJ Redick. Bronny's contract guarantee is the interesting part of this because, he's a second-round pick that was taken super late. That's just not typically something that happens. So I think you're right. He has to earn his time. But I don't know if Bronny is in a position to do that yet. I don't know if he can earn his time because he's so young. He's so underdeveloped. And a 6'1" non-spacing two that's not a real playmaker, real spot-up shooter. That's a really tough place to be in now. He's one of the best athletes in the world, but from an NBA standpoint, there's just like several levels that he needs to get to before he can contribute. JJ knows that. The coaching staff knows that. LeBron knows that. So it's just like, okay, well, how do we make this what it is? Make sure that they have the moment. You snap the pictures. You have LeBron getting his moment. And then now over the course of the rest of the year, we can take him to either the G League, let him develop in our practice system, and let him grow up in there. And that way, by the time he comes out to next year, he's a different player, different situation, or whatever. I just think that it was a really smart move. But I also think that for the watcher and the viewer, that definitely should confirm some things about his overall game. But it's completely fine.
Yep.
I think the hard part is like, how do you talk about Bronny without getting into like the mud? Because it's LeBron James's child, his oldest. But I just think that there's levels to basketball that Bronny can get to, even like in the first year. But he has to play, Wes. He has to be put in advantageous situations to play. And if you're doing that on the NBA floor where you're asked to be a spot-up shooter with your father and all this other stuff, then you got the pressure of the Lakers aura, and then the crowd's like, we need you to hit the shot. We need you to make the shot, do this, do that. You missed a rotation. That's too much. And so JJ found the perfect time, low risk, only reward, put him out there in preseason. Now we're locked in.
And everybody today is talking about Bronny playing for the first time with LeBron James, and we'll do that the first couple of times he plays with LeBron James. We're not going to be necessarily, I don't think at least, putting his game under the microscope until we see this a couple of times and the coolness of it all just sort of wears off. In terms of Bronny's actual production on the court, it wasn't very good. 0 points, missed the only shot he took. It was a three-pointer, 2 rebounds, no assists, 4 turnovers in 13 and a half minutes. Offensively, he's just not there yet.
Yeah.
Defensively, I will say this. He had some good moments. He's good at pressuring the ball. And when I watched Bronny James this game, and when I watched him in Summer League in person in Las Vegas, Swipa, I'm telling you, the kid knows, and this should not be surprising, he knows how to play basketball.
Yeah.
He gets it. He's got a high basketball IQ. He knows where to be. He knows what he has to do on the court. He thinks the game, and I think that's really important here. He's still a step slow sometimes on defensive rotations because he's not like the greatest side-to-side athlete, or at least maybe the recognition or timing right there isn't where it needs to be yet. But I have no doubt that he could figure out how to play NBA-level basketball. It's whether or not he can develop a skill that's at an NBA level. And the main thing, like you already said, is going to be the three-point shooting for him, and it's just not there yet. He's going to have to play. Maybe it's some games in the NBA. I think there's going to have to be a lot of time in the G League, and I think that's going to be fine. But in terms of doing this now, I think you just make it a little bit easier for Bronny to work his way into whatever it is that the Lakers situation is. But let's go ahead and move on to the Boston Celtics, who swept the Nuggets in their 2 preseason games in Abu Dhabi over the weekend. But the biggest takeaway might be Jason Tatum fixing his jumper. Here's John Corrales from Locked On Celtics with more.
Jason Tatum looked really good in this. I think the jumper looks great. It's a little bit, and he talked about it again after the second game, where just better balance, a little bit of a quicker release. It looks quicker. It's not hugely different, but I think the best way I can say it was it looked more segmented, like it happened in stages, right? So it was like a dip, bring it up, and then shoot. This jump shot looks smooth. It's just all one motion, a little bit quicker release, a little bit more on the way up. It's just, I've never really liked Jason Tatum's shooting form, which it doesn't matter really. Like your shooting form doesn't have to be visually pleasing as long as it goes in. Like Reggie Miller had one of the ugliest shots in the world. He's one of the best 3-point shooters we've ever seen. If it works, right? But it stopped working for Jason Tatum in the playoffs. So he tinkered with it, figured it out. It looks good. I like it.
These are the kinds of things that you talk about, I guess, when you have a dominant playoff run and you win the NBA Finals, then you make no real major offseason moves. You don't lose any real roster players. You're not like, I don't know, Jason Tatum's jumper was a little wonky in the playoffs. He obviously got benched in the Olympics because he couldn't make outside shots. So this is what we're going to focus on. I think the Jason Tatum's jumper, is it broken? Is it okay? Is there a problem? Storyline has been way overstated. John Corrales obviously watches these things a lot closer than I do. If he's zeroed into the segmentation of Jason Tatum's shooting form. But here are the numbers, Swipa. 10 of 25 overall in 2 preseason games, 6 of 14 from 3-point range. That's 43% from 3, as John pointed out. That's 1 3-pointer away from being 50% from 3, at least through 2 preseason games. The jumper looks okay. It's what's that?
What was he on twos? 30%?
50, 40%. 40% on twos. So, look, I've never been that concerned about Jason Tatum. I think you go through a lull. Guys go through slumps. His slump just came at the worst possible time in terms of the stage that he was on. What about you?
Look, I mean, this is where the nuance has to come in the conversation about Tatum. He is one of the best players in the league, top 8 or 9. He is one of the most dominant defenders in the league, top 10. He's one of the best playmaking wingers in the league. Yes. One of the best scorers in the league. Yes. He is jack of all trades. The way that I describe Jason Tatum, he's at least a B in almost everything, which is what makes him what he is. But yes, he cannot shoot well because he's surrounded by shooters, like real shooters. Derek White, shooter. Drew, shooter. Peyton, shooter. KP, shooter. Brown, shooter. Horford, shooter. Keep going. So Tatum can shoot below 30% over the course of a playoff run because it doesn't really matter. Because at the end of the day, we're going to play the 3-point game. We're going to get 45 to 50 of them up. And then I'm going to get inside. I'm going to create contact. And even if I miss a jump shot on the other end, I'm going to be able to lock up as a help side wing defender and a help side rim protector. That's like, so Tatum's shot is important because if Tatum is hitting jumpers, that puts them on the volume that he shoots, meaning 19 to 21 shots a game. That puts them in a different category because now if he's hitting 1.12 points per possession as a jump shooter, you're basically is cooked. Like you're probably not beating the Celtics that night. But the room that you get is that the 3-point variance allows for you to have wiggle room. And if they're missing shots, you're able to catch up to a lead or sustain a lead. But if Tatum's able to come down on the other end, pull you up in isolation, and he's hitting 48% of his mid-range shots or 47 of them, do the math. It's like even when we're in a sunken place.
He's a 37% 3-point shooter for his career. He shot 37.6% last year from 3. That was the highest he's had since 2021. To your point, he's not a 3-point shooter. That's not what he's an A+ at. He's very good at all these other things. It's up to everybody else and Joe Mazzulla's math to win out on 3-point on the 3-point math. The Celtics were number 1 in the league in 3-pointers made per possession last year. There you go, point blank. They figured it out. It's not just Jason Tatum. But we have this need to be critical of Jason Tatum because he's not maybe one of the best 5 players in the NBA, as the Celtics proved last year. It don't matter. They're so good. It doesn't matter. And that said, we're getting back to what the normal is for Jason Tatum. Everybody goes through their slumps. His slump came at the worst time. I don't anticipate that being the rest of his career is shooting like that. He's probably going to be right around 37% for the rest of his career because that's what he's been so far. That'll do it for us today. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen today. Everydayers, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Odyssey, wherever you get your podcasts. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Basketball, become a fantasy basketball expert, and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Josh Lloyd. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.